As you can see, the future for the surplus lines industry is limitless and very exciting. You know what? Let me just come out there and talk to you.
Please welcome the Executive Director of the Surplus Line Association of California, Ben McKay.
Morning. From San Ramon to Los Angeles in 2 seconds. That's what I call innovation. Those of you who know me know that I am probably not the person most inclined to quote Chairman Mao, but my speechwriter is a Democrat, so I guess I'm gonna. No, seriously. Even a stop clock is right twice a day, and in a particularly lucid clock-stopped moment, Mao said, when you sense the winds of change, build not a windbreak, but a windmill. And he rode that philosophy to great heights of power, and his competition were literally blown away, literally. And the lesson I take from that is, when the winds of change are blowing, you need to embrace them. If you do, you're likely to prosper. If you don't, you're likely to be swept into the scrap heap of antiquity. And I use this analogy today because I think the winds of change are blowing in the surplus lines industry in a way that's not been seen before. And I'll give you some examples. And by change, just so we have a shared definition, there's change that happens slowly and incrementally and happens all the time. That's evolution, right? There's the primordial ooze, and then there's a single cell organism in it. 1,000,000 years later, it grows a leg, and 1,000,000 years later, it grows another leg and kind of crawls out of the ooze, and 1,000,000 years later, it gets a tail or whatever. That's evolution. What we're talking about is revolution or innovation. We're talking about change that's happening quickly. We're talking about larger increments of change. And evidence of that would be, in the last 10 years, we have, in the surplus lines industry, we have grown almost 2.5 times in California. So for decade after decade, we were essentially 7% or less of the commercial insurance marketplace, and in the last 10 years, we're now 18% in California, 14% nationally. That's a huge change. What does that mean? It means that everything's fundamentally different. We're no longer in the shadows. We're starting to come out of the shadows. People know who we are. We can't sort of play this, keep our head down, I don't think anyway, keep our head down mentality, especially when we start getting into lines of coverage that sort of affect individuals more than corporations. And we'll talk about some of those in a minute. But I think that's a fundamental change. Another fundamental change is in our governance, meaning who in government is looking at us. And so prior to the Dodd-Frank Act, we were state regulated for centuries, not years, centuries. There was even a Supreme Court case in the late 1800s where they tried to decide, well, is insurance interstate commerce? Because if it is, then the federal government should regulate it. If it's not, then the state government should regulate it. Supreme Court said it's not interstate commerce, right? It was a fiction, a fantasy, but it worked for us. So we stayed state regulated. That decision was challenged again in the mid 1900s, 1944, 1945, in Southeast Underwriters, and the Supreme Court changed its mind. Said, no, insurance is actually interstate commerce, and therefore the purview of the federal government to regulate. But Congress said, well, look, just because we can do it doesn't mean we're going to do it. So they passed the law, because they had nothing better to do in 1945. Insurance top of mind. They decided to pass a law that said, yeah, we can regulate it, but we're not going to. And so that's the rubric. McCarran-Ferguson was the name of the act, and that's the rubric we've been living under ever since, until the Dodd-Frank Act. What happened in the Dodd-Frank Act? A couple things. Created a federal insurance office. So for the first time in the Department of Treasury, we have a federal, not regulator, because we specifically put in statute that they're not a regulator, but they sure look and smell like one. They can study all aspects of the insurance industry. So now we have somebody in the Treasury Department looking at all aspects of the insurance industry. They also created this designation of systemically important financial institutions, what we call SIFIs. If you're an insurance company and you're a SIFI, you are regulated. Now you're going to get regulated by the Federal Reserve, among other federal organisms. So now that's a change. For hundreds of years, we've been regulated at the state level. Now all of a sudden we're regulated at the, well, some of us are regulated at the federal level, and if not regulated, certainly viewed all aspects aspects of us are viewed. So that's a change. Flow of capital, we've never seen flow of capital like we see now, right? There's no barriers anymore to money moving back and forth, and as you saw with the blockchain, that's only going to increase, right? All of those mechanisms, those inter-exchange banks, and all those things that add cost to financial transactions, going away. That's fundamentally different. Those organizations have existed since the Great Depression, right? So that's been the state of play until literally today or tomorrow, whenever they get substituted. And then lastly, mergers and acquisitions. Now this has happened obviously before. It's cyclical. We all talk about that. We don't know how long the cycles are, but it's pretty profound. I was talking with Dennis yesterday, and he was saying he prepared a presentation where he looked at all the wholesalers that existed or came into existence over the last 10 years, and at least 50 of them no longer exist in their original form. And if you look at who's writing surplus lines premium in California, in 2017, 52%, so a majority of the surplus lines premium in California was written by 7 broker groups and 8 carrier groups. So now a majority is written by this very tall, very small sliver of the industry. So that's a fundamental change, and we can draw conclusions from all that, from all of this. But the one indisputable conclusion is it's different. Times are changing. What else is changing? Products are changing, right? We have cyber, not just cyber, standalone cyber, but cyber for anything that could be hacked. Autonomous trucks, autonomous cars, planes, trains, right? Cyber. This is the first standard purchase that we've had since D&O, right? So in over a generation. So that's new. That doesn't come along, a standard purchase doesn't come along every day or even every generation necessarily. Lots of data. We're going to start needing products for the misinterpretation of data, the misuse of data, right? That's on the horizon for sure. We have legislative environment that's creating markets. You know, I don't think a lot of times we think about markets being created by people, and certainly innovation, drones, autonomous cars create markets, things for us to insure. But the government can create things for us to insure. For instance, cannabis. You know, the government passed a law, and we have a $7 million industry like that. And in 5 years, it's $7 billion. It's estimated to be $25 billion. So government can create markets. In Washington, D.C. right now, there's legislation to allow for flood insurance to be placed on homes in the surplus lines marketplace. If that legislation passes, that's another market created by us. We also get markets created by climate change, wildfires. Right? We have rampant wildfires. Admitted market is pulling back from those. Many of those homes in those fire-prone areas, they're being picked up, some by the Fair Plan, some by the surplus lines market. In fact, last year, the number of houses insured in the surplus lines marketplace in fire-prone zip codes doubled. So that's a market. So innovation, legislation, climate change, all new ways that markets are being created. And so what does that mean for your association? What does that mean for us? So the board about 5 years ago said, look, we have to get our house in order because we need the association doing, you know, higher level things. We have to get our core responsibilities locked down in a way that is high level, in a way that is constantly evolving, but we need to do more. And so about 5 years ago, we took a look at ourselves, and we realized, you know, we had a long way to go. You know, we had, as far as associations go, we had fallen behind. So for instance, if we invoiced you $100 and you sent us a check for $110, we didn't know what to do with it. So we sent it back, right? That seems wrong. So we fixed that, and if you want to send us extra money, we know what to do with it now. So feel free. But you know, then we had a situation where on that invoice, once we sent it to you, we required you to sign it. And so one day I said to my staff, I said, actually I was at one of these meetings, and someone said, why do we have to sign that invoice? I said, I don't know why you have to sign that invoice. Let me go find out. So I asked one of my senior staff, I said, why do we sign the invoice? What's that all about? We're swearing, you know, if they don't pay, they're going to give us their firstborn child. What's the point? And he said, I don't know. I said, okay. So we had a senior staff meeting, and I said, you have 2 weeks to tell me why we're making people sign the invoice. And 2 weeks later, we had our next meeting, and I said, okay, why are we having to sign the invoice? What do you think the answer was? What was that? We've always done it that way, right? The worst answer in the world, right? Why are we doing it? Oh, we always did it that way. All right, okay. So we don't do that anymore. I said, okay, we're not doing that anymore. And so we've been evolving over the 5 years and finding all of these, we've always done it that way type processes and changing them and fixing them. But then there were also the employees, right? There's a state of mind that we had to address. And we did employee surveys and we talked informally with employees, about how they felt about their organization, what they felt their organization was. And I had one employee say, why do we have to work so hard? We're a charity. I said, we're not a charity. I said, but if you keep talking like that, you're going to need some charity. No, I didn't say that. I like to talk tough when I'm not around them. But yeah, so I said, boy, that's pretty unusual that that's the mentality. So we drilled down into that a little bit more, and we started pointing out that, look, we are a membership organization, but it's no different than if you're a mutual insurance company, right? Your members are your policyholders. If you're a stock company, your stakeholders are your shareholders, right? You're our members, right? Whether it's a stakeholder, a shareholder, policyholder, it's the same thing. And you have to create a value proposition. You have to communicate that value proposition. You have to deliver on that value proposition, right? Regardless. And it's what I further pointed out is, look, a lot of what we call the private markets are acting a lot like us. They want to be member organizations, right? And they have for years and years. Think about AAA, right? You have to be a member to get picked, get your car towed by AAA. Think of USAA, right? Member for life, right? They spend hundreds of millions of dollars telling you you're a member for life if you join USAA. Think about American Express. Membership has its privileges, right? This is a rubric that's existed for a very long time and applies as much to us as it does to American Express and as much to you. And so once we were able to change that mentality in our organization, we started to launch. And I think that's where we are presently. And so what is the point of that? What do we need to be doing? Well, now we need to be doing some higher value things. What are some of the things? Well, first off, we need you to tell us what you think the higher value things are, but we're thinking, number one, compliance. And one of the key roles we play is helping and making sure that all of you stay compliant to keep the regulators out of our business. And as we become, 18% of the market share, we're getting looked at more frequently. And so that's an issue. We need to help you with that. Education, not just CE classes. Our purpose isn't to just sit 300 of you in a room and lecture at you for 3 hours and call that education. Right? We need to be more dynamic in our educational offerings, and that's online, that's cutting up classes, that's providing materials that are useful to you, and not just stuff that's CE focused, but things that get to all of the people that help you. So our membership is legally consists of licensed surplus lines brokers. So when you get your license, by operation of law, you become a member. But we view our membership far more broadly. We view it to include everybody who supports you, because it's your license on the hook, whether that's your lawyers, your compliance people, your clerks, your filers. We spend a lot of money, a lot of time talking with those people because we know they've got to get it right for you. So we have to give educational opportunities to them, and we've done it for filers, but we can do better, and we'll do more, and that's something that we're looking to do more of in the future. We also think a big area for us would be information. Not just data, but information. There's a lot of publicly available surplus lines data, and there's a lot of publicly available other data, whether that's employment data, whether that's consumer price index data. But nobody's taking our data and bumping up against that data and trying to draw some correlations, or better yet, some causations. When this happens over here in the labor market, this happens in the surplus lines market. Right? We haven't looked at that, and I think we should. We have enough data now that we probably can find some gems in there if we do it. And so that's something that we're looking to do in the future, as we now have cleaned up our data sets and made them more usable in terms of bumping them up against publicly available other databases. So that's something we're looking to do. And then lastly, we're looking at advocacy. And you'll hear more about this in a minute. You heard a little bit about it earlier. But advocacy is a huge piece. It's one of the ways we can create markets. It's one of the ways we can protect markets. You know, the perfect example is the one I just used, but let me expand on it. The one I just used being cannabis. We had a proposition that created the recreational cannabis marketplace, potentially a $25 billion marketplace. A rule came out, right? So once there's a proposition, it just had, you know, it's a broad proposition. What's the broad proposition? Cannabis is legal. That's the broad proposition. But that doesn't tell you how it's legal. How do you get licensed? You know, what insurance do you have to have? What are the legal parameters around it, right? The propositions don't go into those details. That's all done by regulation. So the different government departments put out rules. And in the rule, the original rule that they put out, they said, yes, cannabis is legal, and yes, you must get insurance, but no, you cannot get your insurance in the non-admitted market. Specifically prohibited us from playing in that marketplace. So the proposition created a $25 billion marketplace. The regulation said, but you can't play. So we had to go testify at a hearing down here in Los Angeles about that. Fortunately, the Department of Insurance was on our side, and we got that regulation changed. So now, cannabis, all aspects of it, can be insured in the surplus lines marketplace, right? So that's one way that we just opened up a $25 billion marketplace, or potentially a $25 billion marketplace. So we think that advocacy is a big way for us to protect our markets. It's a big way for us to open markets. Same thing happened with autonomous cars. The regulation came out on autonomous cars. You can't insure autonomous cars in the surplus lines marketplace. Same thing happened with contractor licensing for LLCs. So it happens all the time. It's the default of regulators, because they don't understand us, to prohibit us from playing in these marketplaces. So we think that's an important place. That's a place where we could add value and increase our value proposition to you. In conclusion, I invite you to please, bring us your ideas. We certainly will be reaching out to all of you. But I want to end with a quote from Ferdinand Foch, who was a marshal, a French marshal, who said, "My center is giving way, my right is failing, I'm in a good position, I'm attacking." And that's to say that he was the eternal optimist as his lines were falling apart, and he was still attacking. That's how we have to function. A lot of times, one flank might be failing, but that doesn't mean that you should give up. And you just keep going forward. When the regulation comes out and you're not in it, you don't give up. You attack, and you change it. And so that's what we're going to do on your behalf. I'd like to take a moment of personal privilege to thank Tom Cardello, who's been my chairman, your chairman, for the last year. Tom's been invaluable in what I call the sort of the final year of shoring up the association and making sure that we stayed on task, that we made sure that we were fiscally responsible, put into place policies that guaranteed that, created a system that made us impenetrable to fraud internally, which I think is incredibly valuable. And would always, and gave me sort of my Northern Star, which he would always ask me these two questions whenever I would make a decision. I would say, "Do you think this is the right decision?" He would say, "Well, was it good for the organization?" "Yes." "Was it moral and ethical?" "Yes." So, "Okay, you made the right decision." So that became, whenever I would make a decision, I would ask myself those two questions, because I knew there was a decent probability that I'd get asked them by Tom. And I think I'm going to keep asking myself those questions going forward. So thank you for that, Tom. Appreciate it. And thank all of you for being here. We're going to have a few more presentations. I'm going to be available later on the presentation or afterwards to answer any questions that you have. This is your association. We respond to you. So please ask anything of us. Thank you.